Hi, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Octeto Webinar. Excited to have you all here. My name is Ramiro Berrellesa. I'm the CEO and founder of Octeto. And today we're going to be talking about database migrations and how you can combine the power of privacy dynamics and Octeto to help you solve those challenges. Hey, John. Welcome. How are you? Good morning.
Good morning. How's it going?
Pretty good, pretty good. Good to see you again. It's always exciting to talk about privacy dynamics, Octeto, and how those two products together can help speed up the dev experience for teams of all sizes.
For sure. Yeah, it's great to connect again.
All right. So I was just introducing Octeto and all the ideas around the environments before you joined. But how about we start by talking about privacy dynamics? What is it about? Why it matters, and then we can dive into like the today's topic of database migrations.
Sure. So Privacy Dynamics we've been around for about 4 years, and we were headquartered here in Seattle, and we were founded to unlock data that doesn't get used because it contains sensitive information. So information about people, personally identifiable information, healthcare information, consumer data, usually can't be used because it's so sensitive. And so what we do is we're essentially a step in your ETL pipeline. We'll read in your data, process it in memory, and write it out in an anonymized state to a destination database. And we're looking for direct identifiers. We also treat indirect identifiers. We've talked about this before, but attributes that an individual has, like age, gender, location, religion, those things can be combined together to uniquely identify a person. And so we handle those attributes as well.
That's super interesting, and that's something that we've talked about this before, but for the audience, as you think of data, I think this concept of direct and indirect identifiers is something that is important for people to know, right? Like most of us, when we're developers, we think, hey, if I remove the name, if I remove the date of birth, that's it. I'm good. I can handle this data. I can put it on like a test suite. I can publish it in like a GitHub repo for like test scenarios. And the reality is that that's not enough. If you want to be good stewards of our customers' data, we need to do a lot more. And this is not easy, right? Like making sure that from one side, as a developer, I need data. I want data to be able to make sure that my code works. But at the same time, as in my case, the CEO of a company, I want to make sure that we're using data the right way, that we're not putting our customers' privacy at risk, that we're not, like publishing data that can help identify somebody for like whatever nefarious means. And that to me is really one of the biggest things I've learned by watching, like Privacy Dynamics, your product, your webinars. I think that's something that hopefully today we're making our contribution to like developers of the world to understand that it's not just about erasing one field or like removing the last 3 characters of a zip code. It's a lot more than that.
Yeah, and it can vary by industry. So for healthcare, for sure, healthcare has to meet a higher standard with HIPAA. Companies in Europe, the privacy laws are much stricter in Europe, and again, that's where treating indirect identifiers becomes more important. There are certainly scenarios where just removing direct identifiers, phone number, social security number, driver's license number, there are scenarios where that is sufficient, right?
Yeah, that's where data is a fascinating topic, but I think for today we're talking specifically about like something very tactical, which is you have data, you understand that data is important. How do you integrate data in your development, testing, CI flows? And specifically for today, how do you deal with database migrations? I posted LinkedIn yesterday a message kind of provoking a bit on like, hey, Have you ever broken production before because of a database migration? Have you ever put data that wasn't compatible and you didn't realize that this would happen until the very end? We got some interesting answers, and I've done it several times. I've been a developer for a long time now. I've done it several times because it's hard. It's hard to get data. It's hard to grasp it. It's hard to understand the shape of it, especially if you have like software that's been running on for a long time. Um, names are so valuable, like addresses. They have different formats, currency, all these things that we believe there's only one way. They have so many, so it's a challenge I've always had, and I'm excited to see how and show you all how Privacy Dynamics and Octeto can help you kind of deal with your migrations, test them, and make sure that everything is ready to go as soon as you write code and not until you hit production. So what do we jump to demo, John? What do you think?
Yeah, actually, I've got one slide I want to show first.
Perfect.
Just for a high level. Let me see if I can figure out how to share the screen. One sec. Okay. This is very, very rudimentary. But this is essentially what we're going to be doing. Privacy Dynamics is not in this diagram, but all the environments on the right are Octeto, and we are anonymizing the production database, landing it in a destination database location, and snapshotting it and keeping it ready to go, so you can farm it out for n number of environments for running your CI, running your QA, whatever you're doing. Even the developers can get access to these databases that are anonymized and have essentially production data ready to go. And then let me share another screen here. I'm just going to show the basic app that we have. And actually, it's probably good to take a look at Octeto as well, right?
Yeah, so kind of to fill everybody in on what John just showed us, like the first step on like testing migrations of those things is, hey, source of data. Production is great, but you shouldn't use it just as is. Privacy Dynamics helps you by allowing you to connect the database to Privacy Dynamics. It will extract the data, it will clean it, make it privacy aware, and then that is the data you can make available for your developers to consume. This can be done in many ways, but today we're going to show you Octeto, which is our product. It's a platform to automate the entire developer experience of your team, everything from like where data is coming from, how to spin up the environments, how to access databases, cloud accounts, and many more things. And what you're seeing here is Octeto in action. In this case, we have a dev environment that John and I deployed before the webinar, where you can see that the application we'll be showing today is already up and running. 3 microservices, an API, a UI, a database. Everything is running remotely, so nothing is running on our local computers, which means we don't have to deal with local dependencies. We don't have to deal with messy, README and installation scripts. One click, the environment runs fully configured, in this case, even with data, on Octeto, which runs on Kubernetes, and everybody in your team can deploy this.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, Ramiro, is it's running in the cloud. It's running in Octeto, and that means your databases don't have to leave the cloud. You might have a large, your production database might be really, really large. You snapshot it. You don't want your engineers having to pull it down every day. This way, you've always got a fresh copy, essentially a copy of production that's privacy safe, and you don't have to deal with, all the ingress and egress on that large database.
That is one of the, when we start moving customers to remote dev environments, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is one of the first things that they always notice. By moving your environments with Octeto to the cloud, the network just changes. You're no longer pulling things from a data center to your home office network, to your laptop. It's all staying in the cloud, which means that data moves faster. You can move a lot more data, and for teams on kind of more of a compliance-oriented industries, you have full control of where the data stays. So you can configure in a way that your customer's data never touches your developer's laptop. It never touches any other place. It cannot be extracted. All around making it secure, private, with great governance and under control. So those are a few of the benefits of integrating remote dev environments with Octeto, with data, and then privacy dynamics to help you with the data privacy aspect of things.
And Romero, the one thing I think is really cool about Octeto is that I was able to create multiple namespaces. So by default, I get a namespace with my username, but then I can create as many other namespaces as I want. And I can deploy different applications, or even maybe different versions of the same application into each namespace, which I've found to be really cool.
Yeah, that is, you're right. I'm glad you mentioned it, because that is one of another big value of having these environments run on the cloud is you can technically have as many as you need. For today's demo, it was very useful because, as you can see there, we have multiple namespaces for different stages of development. With the old migration, with the new schema, one for us to try our code independently, and this is the kind of team dynamics that moving from local environments to remote environments with data allows you to do. You could have a namespace with every step of your migration. You can switch from one to another, and every namespace has all the services, databases, its own data, its own URL. So it's almost like you have several laptops that you can jump from one to another as you test different things. This is something that is a huge productivity boon for teams, and particularly when you're dealing with data, because as data is something you have to iterate on. You need to undo migrations and redo them, and that's where products like Octeto and Dynamics can really help you go faster. But I think we should really talk more about the demo and how we got to this.
Right. So this is just a very basic UI. This is the app itself. It's written in JavaScript. It's got a API container running with Node. The UI is just literally a static HTML file being served with Nginx, and then we have a third container running Postgres database. And just looking at this right here, we can see that we have direct identifiers. We have phone number over here. We also have indirect identifiers, location, city, state, zip, age, gender. All those things can be combined together to uniquely identify people. And for the demo, we are gonna. It's a very simplistic demo, but it's the sort of thing that happens all the time that engineers are always banging their heads on. A simple change. So we've got date of birth, but it's stored in the database as a string, and we're going to convert it to a date time column. But the engineers that are working locally, maybe they have just a small synthetic data set. They don't have all of the sort of edge case outliers in the production database. And just let me see if I have this running correctly. Just to foreshadow a little bit, you can imagine that something like this is going to present a problem when you have migration. But if you don't have something like that in your data when you're working locally, your migration is going to work fine. It's not until you deploy to production that it crashes and fails, and you have to figure out what went wrong. So what we're proposing is that you run that migration against production-like data well in advance of actually running it in production.
And that to me is something I want to take a second to talk more about, which is this power of running your migrations with data that looks like production as you develop. Traditionally we're used to doing these things only on CI, or maybe only in production, or in some cases, only a special team that owns the schema and the data, and they have this archive of data. And, that works. Yes, it's possible. There's a lot of friction. It slows things down. And when we talk about modern development experiences, one of the things we always talk about is how can we enable things, to shift left? How can we get more people to do things earlier in the cycle when it's cheaper to iterate? And that's what we're talking about here, is through this proposal is, hey, you have an application with data. Let's give you the tools so you can validate this migration, so you can have data that looks realistic early on. Again, by respecting the privacy of our customers, which is very important. Do not give, every developer a data dump from production. That is not good. We're not being good stewards of our customers' privacy. We could get into legal issues. This data can be leaked. It has happened before where very famous companies, because they were following these practices, ended up with these privacy breaches where suddenly somebody published, an S3 bucket with customers' addresses or credit card numbers or date of birth. So let's prevent that from happening by giving developers self-service access to data that looks realistic, with statistically the same, but without breaching our customers' trust. And that is, if you get one thing out of this webinar, is hey, there is a way. You can give your developers access to data in a way that is easy to consume, easy to validate, and so that we can make a strong step forward towards eliminating the, will it work in production? Well, it worked on my machine. No. With tools like Octeto, Privacy Dynamics, you can have that certainty that, hey, it will work because I run this migration with the same kind of data, same kind of systems, same DB engines. It works, I'm sure. Let's go to the next step.
Yeah, so Ramiro, I'm just going to jump in and show the UI for Privacy Dynamics, and then we can pivot over to Octeto. But yeah, just to give you a better idea of how we're anonymizing the data, I'm going to walk through just a sample wizard. And I think it's important also to make the distinction that we're not creating synthetic data. We're taking real data. We're only looking for dangerous parts of the data and tweaking that. But all the other records, if there's nothing risky about them, we're not going to touch them. So if you've got, 5% of your records are at risk of re-identification, we're only going to touch 5%. We're going to leave the other 95% intact. So you're, as an engineer, as a data engineer, data scientist, you're going to have the most realistic data because it actually is real data. So I'm going to connect to, I believe this is a Postgres database. This is a fictional database, sort of an e-commerce set of tables. I'm going to choose to anonymize all 4 of the tables, and I'm going to tell the application where to write it to. So I'm going to write it to a new schema within Postgres. You can take the default settings, and we're going to be very conservative with the default settings on how we anonymize the tables. Or if you really need to, you can dive in and review or tweak the settings for all of the tables. And just to give you like a pretty good picture here, Ramiro. So we're going to look at all the columns in the tables, and we're going to categorize them. We're going to make our best guess of what those columns contain. And then we're going to look for primary keys and foreign keys. for example, this column, the ID column, is a primary key, and by default, we're going to lock that value. So we're going to make sure that even when the data comes out of privacy dynamics and lands in the destination, all your relationships are intact. For, say, full name or email address, we can provide realistic looking values that are not actually real. And for date of birth and gender, you can either leave those values as is, or you can choose to anonymize them. And what that means is that we're going to look for records that are at risk and cluster individuals into buckets of 3 or more. And we'll take the mean for, say, the birth date or someone's zip code. And so you'll have, 3 records within the data set that all have the same date of birth.
Oh, that's pretty cool. For somebody who's starting with this idea of like making data available to their developers, want it to be private, what do you recommend is like a good way to start? Like, try to eliminate anything? Are there some kind of like best practices that you say, hey, these are the 3-4 things that, watch out for these 5 things, and that will get you, like 80% there? What have you seen as people typically do to get started?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think typically people start by writing a script. Well, first they start by copying the production database. Then they progress to writing a script to strip out certain values out of the copy of the production database. And I think that's at least a step in the right direction to remove phone numbers, social security numbers. But then what ends up happening is it's a whack-a-mole job, right? Like, your engineers are spending time maintaining these cleansing scripts instead of working on your actual product. And then also, things will slip through the cracks. And so, we, very well, Ramiro, we use preview environments very heavily. For about a year, we were building this preview environment system ourselves in-house, and it never really quite worked exactly the way we wanted to. And we were, distracted from what we should have been working on. And so we actually switched to using Octeto, and that made our lives much, much better. The same goes for handling and cleaning your data. It's better just to outsource that work.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I always, we've talked about this before, but it's something that we always talk to our community friends is, we are all specialists in different areas, and it's important to like focus on that. Like, if your business is not cleaning data, don't try to do it yourself. There's a lot more complexities. There's a lot of cost on building, on maintaining, on making like a nice UI and easy to use, like what John was showing us. So keep that in mind.
So I created a branch earlier with the migration to convert that column from a string to a date time. And I pushed that up to GitHub. And we ran the migration as part of our CI, and it failed. It failed on the XYZ value. And so I thought it'd be good, Ramiro, to just take a look at how we actually did this.
Yeah.
And I think maybe also we can take a look at because we're using a Docker Compose file to power Octeto, but maybe we can take a look at the Compose file, and then you can speak to what's going on with the Compose file.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So we can switch back over here to my IDE. So the Compose file's got the API, the UI, and the DB, passing environment variables, what's happening behind the scenes? How's this going from, Docker Compose up into Kubernetes?
Yeah, so Octero supports multiple ways of defining your environment, your application that you're going to be developing. Docker Compose, Helm charts, Terraform scripts, we support them all. As developers, we know that applications come in different shapes, and we want to meet you where you are. So if you have a Docker Compose, as is the case for John here, that's all you need to start using Octero. You can see there, we did a lot of work to create a translation layer that will take your Docker Compose. It will examine all the pieces, and it will convert that into necessary resources on Kubernetes, because Octero runs on top of Kubernetes, to make this environment available with one click and for everybody in your team, in your company, depending how you set it up. A few things that we can help you with our platform is kind of setting this up for everybody. You have a single Docker Compose file on your repo. You can define secrets that Octero will inject, database passwords, tokens, in this case, hey, where you get your source of data from, where is this data dump that has been cleaned. You can define all those things at Octero so that when your developers click deploy, they just run the environment and it's available in a few seconds. And Octero will create the resource in Kubernetes. It will give you an endpoint you can access, a unique endpoint per environment that we'll see in a second. That's how John's been showing us the application running. And it will also give you the ability to connect to this environment and develop directly there, which means that you don't have to run databases locally, you don't have to run your migrations locally, and you don't need to install anything. Like when we're building this demo, one of the things we want to do is, hey, let's call PSP SQL, which is the CLI for Postgres. And John's working on a Windows machine. I'm working on a Mac. And, instead of having to deal with this, hey, how do I install this locally in one OS or another? We define that in Octero as part of our compose. And then when we're both developing, we're both using the same configuration, separate environments, but everything is pre-installed. And this allowed us to go much faster, to not be bogged down by like OS differences, by how do I install this, which version are you on, which secret are you using. All that gets fully automated. And that's how you get from having to run things locally to having a platform where you click the deploy button. That creates an environment for you, in this case with all the services, our application and endpoint and the data. And then you can do the same thing with GitHub. You can integrate Octero with GitHub to have what John showed us, which is, hey, as a secondary step, deploy the application as part of your pull request, run your tests there, and make sure that the migration passes before you merge. Those are the things that once you have the application defined Octero, that you can very easily do.
Ramiro, you want to take a look at the workflow? I think there's one sort of key part of the workflow. It's very simple, but
yeah, no, of course. So let's do something. Do you want me to share my screen and show kind of how this all works?
Yeah. Why don't you share your screen?
Sounds good. Share my screen. Here we go. So I have the same repository that John was showing. I have my own environment of Octero where, same as John, I have my application running. In this case, I configured my instance of Octero to use different colors. It's because I want to try something different, but it's all the same. You can see here that the repo's there, all the elements are running. So now what I want to show you is how we go from, hey, I have an environment with data that John showed us, to like, hey, I have an environment with data where I want to test my migrations and all those things. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the kind of unique things that Octero gives you is the ability to connect your local machine to this remote dev environment. There's a command called Octero up. It's a CLI that you install. Install a CLI, single binary, runs on Windows, Mac, Linux, Apple Silicon, ARM, Intel, It runs everywhere. We even have some of our community members running this on like Raspberry Pis and other alternatives to like traditional computing devices. So you type Octero up. Octero will analyze your Docker Compose to tell you, hey, which services are available for development. In this case, we're going to work with the API service because that's the one that runs the migrations, accesses the data, and makes it available for the UI. So Octero brings a lot of things to the table. It will build your containers on demand if it's needed. It will like synchronize your code from your local machine to this remote environment. It will automatically inject the secrets that you need. Everything will be there for you, automatic, consistent, so that everybody in your team gets the same. So for instance, you can see here, I'll switch to Bash because that's my favorite terminal, a shell. But you can see here that says, hey, you're connected to ramiro.octero.dev, my instance of Octero. You're using the namespace called PVC because that's what I named my namespace. And you have users-API, the service, the one that we selected. So at this point, I'm in a terminal. This is synchronizing all my code from my local machine to here. You can see that I have all these things. If I go back to VS Code, let me just close all of these things. You can see that that is very similar to this. It is the same code. If I were to, for instance, create a file here that says demo.txt, and I say, hey, are you ready for the dev x demo? And I save this file. I'm going to go back here, and you'll see that there is a file here called demo that says, are you ready for the DevX demo? Let's say, just for fun, we'll say, yes, we are. And we'll pipe this back to demo.txt. Let's actually do it like this. And a break line, so it looks a bit nicer. When I go back here, let me close this. And you'll see the break didn't work, but you can see that the file I added is, the text I added to the file is there. And that is super high level, but that is one of the key things that makes Octero different. I'm now working on this remote dev environment. I'm connected to it. Why is this important? Because in this case, we're talking about migrations. So now I have this remote environment, right? And as I was saying before, everything is pre-installed. So I have pSQL here. In this case, if I just run pSQL, I'm like, I don't remember the commands, right? Which password, which username? Well, it doesn't matter because whoever set up the environment for me fully automated this for me. So if I do npm run pSQL, and I run it in the right folder, npm run pSQL, you can see it's there. It set up the password, the host, everything. So when I query, hey, which tables I have available here, you can see I have my users table and I have my SQLize table. We're using SQLize to manage our migrations, but it's all here. So if I do select from users, you'll see my data is there. And this is the data that John was showing us, right? This is the data that looks like production, but it's isolated. And John and I are using the same data. And we're using the same data because our compose is configured to pull this data on every environment. So we're already working with something very similar. So that's really cool. In this case, I'm going to exit Postgres. And now let's try, something. We're using SQLize, which, if you're not familiar, is one of Node's frameworks for data migration. We have two migrations here, as John explained. One to create, I have it here. One to create the database base. We already saw it. We have the data. And then one, as John said, to change the type from string to date, because we want it to be a date. So normally, what would you do? You change the migration. You have to write some code, some tests, spin up a database, try, drop it, and then run your CI. And if it failed, you'd be like, I don't know what to do. With this new flow, you don't have to do that. You have it all here, right? You have your own Postgres instance. You have your own data. You have your own environment. You can always destroy and recreate as needed, which means that, and just so that I run the actual command, means that I can run this command here, npx sequelize dbmigrate. This is the sequelize command, nothing to do with Octeto, nothing to do with parser dynamics. This is the command we're using for run our migrations. You could be using Rails and their migration system. You could be using Pydantic in Python. There's many of them. That doesn't matter. The ability to like run them locally as you write code is what makes them so useful, because I can run this command, sequelize, and you can see that the schema ran, right? It ran on my database and it worked. It was able to like rename the column, change the type, all those things. And we know it works because now, if I go back to Postgres, in this case, I have a shortcut, npm run psql, and I show you the table users, you'll see that now the date of birth is a date, is no longer a string. And this is the kind of things you can do with Octeto, because let's say that I got it wrong. Let's say that my code, actually, let's see, right? If I run my service, npm start, and I start my service, let's say that it doesn't work for whatever reason. In this case, it worked. I'm not getting any errors, but maybe I'm getting an error. I can always like stop, do, in this case, I have a shortcut for like db, for migrate, undo. I can roll back the migration. I can do it again as many times as I need. If at some time, at some point, I'm like, hey, this is not working well anymore, something went wrong, I can always exit my environment, destroy it. -b means you can destroy even the volumes. It goes away, destroys the database, destroys the services, all of those things. And then I can just deploy it again, bring me back from zero. And that way I can iterate very quickly, catch on errors, run any types of tests. But what's important here is that I'm doing that on my local environment. I am not affecting anybody else. I'm not blocking anybody else. I'm not using a shared service. I'm not using staging and leaving it messed up for everybody else. No, I can load bigger data, smaller data. If somebody makes other data sets available for me, it's all in your dev environment. It's all pre-configured. It's all really fast. And it's all ephemeral, which means that you saw it took a few seconds. I now have a clean environment. I can repeat the Octeto up users API dance. It will log in. It will connect to my environment. Now it's clean. I'm going to have my database with my data pristine, ready for me to run more schema tests as needed. And then what I find really cool here is that once you're done, you know it works in your environment. You commit, you push. You can use what John was mentioning, which is preview environments, to run the same verifications on your pull request so that other people can see the application. Other people can see the data live and give you feedback on like, hey, that is the right migration, or no, actually we need to use this other data type because it's better, or hey, you're missing this in your code or in your tests. Any of those things that really, really help. So in this case, let's just go to source. We do npm run psql. And if I do users, you see it's not there. My data is clean. But now I need to run npm run migrate, which is a shortcut for the migration tool. And you see I'm back from zero. And I'm ready to roll. npm run psql. Users, and you see it's there. In this case, it ran all the migrations. That's why we have the DOP date, but I can drop it and run partial migrations. You can do any of those things. What do you think, John, about this? What's your, we saw this earlier today as we're working on the demo. As a developer, what's your impression of this new flow and the use of dev environments?
Well, I think it's great. I think engineers can shift their work leftward, saving pain when you're deploying to production. The other thing that you touched on briefly, but kind of glossed over it, but I think it's a really important point, is you mentioned, not really having to do staging or QA. And I would say, actually, no, you you are doing staging in QA. It's just you're using these preview environments. So you no longer have to have a dedicated VM or like this, what's the expression they say, treat your machines like cattle and not like pets.
Yeah. That's a really
Right.
good point. Yes, you're
So
right.
like that's what we do is we'll use a preview environment, but that preview environment is actually our where we're doing QA work and staging and validating that the code works.
Yeah, I like what you're talking about, like especially like the cattle. But yes, staging shouldn't be like this mystical, unique environment. It's much better when like everybody has access to environments that look like staging, that have data where you can run all these tests. Definitely for me, like enabling developers to run all these validations before they even commit. Like if you saw this demo we gave you, we're not committing code, but we're testing migrations. We're playing with the data. We're running services to make sure everything works end to end. All that is something that it's hard to do with traditional tooling, and that's where I think Octeto and Privacy Dynamics can contribute a lot to make your team and your organizations a lot more effective.
Absolutely. That was great, Ramiro.
Well, I think we covered a lot today, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, John, for this. I mean, we can go on hours on dev experience and privacy and why they actually are part of the same thing. As all of you think of your platform engineering efforts, internal development platforms, or just pure dev experience, remember that dev environments, data, privacy are elements that if you ignore, your developers will make the choices and they might make choices that compromise your customers' privacy. And that's something that we should all work hard not to. But I think that's what we had covered for the demo. I would like to turn it to the audience in case there are any questions. Or John, if you have any questions of things we didn't cover or things you want to kind of like to talk more about, floor is yours.
Well, the repo that we're doing this demo in is a public repo. I think we should share it after the webinar is over, and get feedback from other people and learn how are they validating stateful tests of their migrations. Like you can write all these tests in your code, but you can't really test around all the outliers in your data. So it's something I'm always interested to talk to people about and learn how they're solving that problem.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's a good challenge, like for the audience. Like, we'd love to hear how you deal with these things, and what do you think about these modern tools? Is this a problem for you? Are you just not doing this because it's hard? What do your customers think about this? Right, that's always a cool conversation to have. I don't know if anybody in the audience has experience with this. We'd love to hear what you think. While the audience kind of gets warms up, there's a good question from David. John, who owns data migration, and how do you think this relates to platform engineering teams? That's a really good question. Who owns data migration? Who owns making data available, and how everything fits together?
Can I say it depends?
As long as that's not the only thing you say.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the size of your team. I mean, if your team is small, then I think whoever writes the migration owns it, and I think as long as they have access to production-like data, then there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to see that migration through until it succeeds successfully. Obviously, you have to have some sort of infra or SRE people involved or expertise involved. But I mean, even the collaboration that Ramiro and I did on this project, it took two of us to work on it. And, the more pairs of eyes you can get on it, the better.
Yeah, and I like the way we collaborated. I think it's a good example, small example, but of these dynamics that happen with platform engineering teams, right? Like going back to like areas of expertise. Like John's an expert on privacy, on kind of extract data from databases, how to package it. I don't know anything about that, right? But I am an expert on setting up dev environments, on making environments that are repeatable, that contain secrets, that are like easy to use, all those things, right? So we're working together. We build this experience that we believe is polished and enables high velocity, high trust, but in a way that is governed, and limited, because we don't want like people to launch whatever they want. I think it's an example of how modern platform engineering teams are working, right? Different disciplines are put together. In the old times, it was only for production. Like if you've been around for as long as I've been, and I'm sure John went through the same. For the longest time, production was what mattered, and dev was like, oh yeah, developers will figure it out. It's on them. And that's no longer the way, right? Like we're building more complex applications, different pieces, source of information. So I like that. I like how like you can have all these different ownership of like, hey, there's a team that owns production and they can make data available. And then they connect it to Process Dynamics. So the platform team has access to like clean data, which then they can make accessible to their developers for them to test. And everything at the end of the day for the higher purpose of shipping value, making sure our code works, and to enable developers to be happy, go fast, and like ship value for our customers, which is why we're all on this together.
Romero, there's also, we skipped it today, but the snapshotting capability within Octeto is really handy.
Yeah, that's another feature that we've invested in kind of like, we call that a data catalog, which is the idea, or like volume snapshots, which is the idea of like, today we show you a demo with one set of data. But you could effectively set up an environment where you can give your team, I like to call this a data catalog, right? Like imagine you have 5 or 6 different snapshots of like data from different shapes, or data that is, hey, 3 schema migrations before. And because you want to be able to test, hey, what happens when I do 5 migrations at a time? Or what happens when I do just from the latest to like the one I'm writing? That's something that Octeto enables. That's something that's, once you move again to ephemeral environments, because they're ephemeral, because you can play with the data, you can like restore things very quickly. They're running on the internet, so data movement is not as expensive. It enables a lot of new scenarios, and that's part of why we do these webinars, is to help our community start thinking of these new scenarios, and how data is not this static idea. Data is not this script that you wrote once to generate seed data and you never look at it again. It's not the single dump that's one developer did once and manually cleanse the data. No, like we have customers who are like building like global e-commerce stores, who are doing like data design or data analysis, and they need fresh data. They need data that continuously updates, that looks like what their customers are doing. One of our customers is this company doing AI for like female healthcare, and for them that was really cool. They were like, hey, we can't use static data or artificial data, because that data is going to bias our AI models to certain direction, because it doesn't look like the real thing. So they wanted data that looked real. They couldn't use real data because of healthcare HIPAA compliance. But for them, having environments with data that was clean, that looked like production, that they could deploy 10 times per day with like different types of data, it made them so much way more efficient, and allow them to complete their features faster, which means that, hey, more people have access to high-tech healthcare sooner. And that's where like the power of these tools, I think, really shows, is in getting all those really cool things you're working on out there faster, with higher quality, with higher trust, and in a way that is compliant, which is something that is more important every day.
The example we showed, Romero, was pretty simple, and it seemed kind of dumb, but we actually had a customer that in their data they had 5-digit years.
Oh wow.
You
There's
think about,
so many of
that.
those. Like you could make an entire webinar or like a blog post on like all this. I'm sure you've seen so many like rarities around
Right,
data.
right. But you would be surprised how many assumptions you bake into your code that aren't, or you're not going to have a 5-digit year. Um, and and when you're doing QA work or you're writing a script to create seed data, that's the sort of thing you're not ever going to think to do. But unfortunately, they didn't have any sort of form validation, and they were getting all these bogus years added into their application,
Wow.
and over and over and over and over. Yeah, to my knowledge, it still hasn't been fixed.
That's very interesting. That is very interesting. That's very cool. Well, that's a great story. To wrap up our webinar, if anybody has any extra questions, we'll make the recording available. We're always around. John, if you will have questions around privacy dynamics, how to get started, about what to do with their data, and how to make sure they're compliant but like realistic, what's the best way to reach out to you or to get started with privacy dynamics?
Just go to privacydynamics.io and get started. You can sign up. There's a SaaS service. We deploy into your AWS, GCP, Azure if you need it. You don't have to do that. You can sign up for the SaaS service and kick the tires first. And feel free to reach out. We're on the internet. You can find us.
Perfect. Well, the same goes for us. Octeto.com. We have a free trial. All you need is a Kubernetes cluster. You install Octeto there, and in a few minutes you're up and running. We will make this sample available if you want to try our sample with data and all these things. I think it's a really cool way to visualize the power of Octeto while still and privacy dynamics while still keeping like simple components as you learn. But thank you, everybody. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for attending, and we'll see you in the next one. And thank you, John.
Bye.